Welcome, and thank you for tuning into today's episode. Today we begin the construction of the legendary B-17 bomber, a project that will accompany us well into 2025. For this build, I'll be using the recently released limited edition kit, the Bloody Hundredth by Eduard in 1/48 scale. Let's dive in and bring this iconic aircraft to life, one meticulous detail at a time. In addition to the kit, I'll be incorporating an extensive range of photo-etched parts to elevate the model's detail to an entirely new level. These precision pieces will help bring the intricate features of the B-17 to life, making it a true showstopper. I've also purchased the Eduard Big Sin package specifically designed for this kit, which, by the way, is originally from HK Models. This set includes highly detailed weaponry, a metal landing gear, and superior wheels, all of which surpass the standard components of the kit and will truly enhance the final result. And as just shown, the engines will also be replaced using Eduard's aftermarket parts. Furthermore, I'm planning to showcase the B-17 in my largest diorama to date. For this ambitious display, I've acquired several scenery pieces from MiniArt, which I'll briefly show you now. These additions will help create a vibrant and immersive setting worthy of this iconic aircraft. Of course, no diorama would be complete without figures. I'll be using approximately 20 in total for this scene, including a handful of mechanics actively working on the aircraft. One of the engines will be left open, as seen in some historical photographs, to depict it undergoing maintenance, a small but striking detail that will bring the diorama to life. In addition, I'll be building this fuel truck from Tamiya, which comes complete with 2 soldier figures. This vehicle will add an extra layer of realism to the diorama, perfectly complementing the bustling activity around the B-17. And finally, the big highlight. Well, aside from the B-17 itself, of course, if you've delved into the history of bombers from the Second World War, you're likely familiar with the iconic crew photos often taken before missions. These images served as a final memento of the brave men who gave their lives over Europe. To capture this poignant moment, I've acquired 11 3D printed figures posed to recreate such a scene in front of the aircraft, complete with a cameraman. Let me show you these figures briefly. If you'd like to follow this build series or explore more of my other projects, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Thank you so much. But now, enough talk. Let's get started on building the interior of the B-17. As usual, the build begins with the cockpit. The individual parts are carefully removed from the sprues using nippers, with any excess plastic trimmed away using a hobby knife and then sanded smooth. To prepare the surfaces for the 3D decals and photo-etched parts, I also remove the kit's rudimentary cockpit details using a knife or a rotary tool. This photo-etched part is unfortunately a bit too long, so I'll trim it to the correct size using an appropriate pair of scissors. A few additional cables will also be installed. To achieve this, I cut small sections from hollow brass tubes, which will later serve as holders for the lead wires. These are deliberately left with exaggerated ends to add a touch of realism and detail. Now it's time to apply the primer and the main color. A bit of chipping here and there helps give the whole cockpit a slightly weathered and worn look. The effect is intentionally exaggerated to enhance the realism and capture the rugged character of the B-17's interior. To replicate the characteristic wooden flooring, I'm using Aftermarket decals. These are unfortunately very thin and tear easily, so extra care is needed during application. First, I apply microsol to the surface where the decal will be placed. The decal is then soaked in lukewarm water for about 30 seconds to release it from its backing paper. After carefully positioning it, I let it dry for about 5 minutes before applying microset to ensure a smooth and secure finish. The 3D decals for the cockpit are attached using acrylic glue. Now it's time for weathering. Before starting, I apply a layer of glossy varnish to protect the underlying paint and details. Once the wash is applied and left to dry for about 40 minutes, most of it is carefully removed using a sponge or a cotton swab, leaving just enough to accentuate the details and crevices. For more stubborn areas, odorless thinner is used to clean up the excess, ensuring the weathering remains dramatic and highlights every worn edge and shadowed corner. The cockpit and bomb tray can now be assembled. Next up is the radio compartment, where the steps naturally repeat a bit. Once again, primer is applied first, followed by the main color. Several parts, particularly the radio equipment, have also been prepared for 3D decals to enhance their detail and realism. To enhance the wood effect on these small parts, Iraqi sand, a very light yellowish tone, is applied using the dry brush technique. This adds subtle highlights and brings out the grain-like texture, giving the pieces a more realistic, worn appearance. The fitting of the parts, well, let's just say it leaves much to be desired. There are barely any proper mounting points for the individual components, and once assembled, the whole structure feels rather unstable. I had to resort to using superglue in several places just to keep it all together. This is my first kit from HK Models, and I must admit I'm a bit disappointed, especially considering the price point they charge for their kits. Of course, not everything has to fit together effortlessly like the newer Tamiya kits, but I do feel the designers at HK Models could put a bit more effort into their engineering. Perhaps the B-17 kit is an exception, I can't say for sure. Since I'm already a bit further along in the build, I can tell you that the fuselage in particular requires a considerable amount of putty, and naturally some details are lost in the process. But what can you do? We work with what we have. Hopefully, it will still result in a beautiful B-17 when all is said and done. The ammo boxes included in the kit are incredibly rudimentary. so I'll be replacing them with photo-etched parts for a much sharper and more detailed look. Additionally, the kit doesn't include any ammo chutes, so these will also be crafted using aftermarket parts. While these details will be barely visible in the final build, I believe they're a fantastic addition, adding that extra layer of authenticity that truly sets a model apart. Sometimes it's the hidden details that make the whole project feel complete. This black superglue is fantastic for holding the side panels together, and equally fantastic for gluing your fingers together in the process. On the bright side, it also acts as a microfiller, helping to seal any small gaps. Any excess glue can easily be removed with superglue debonder and a cotton swab, leaving a clean and precise finish. That's already looking so much better, don't you think? Feel free to leave a comment below the video, and if you enjoyed it, maybe give it a like as well. Now that the weapons are prepared, we can turn our attention to the fuselage. First, a multitude of supporting plastic pieces must be carefully removed to prepare the sections for assembly. After the primer has been applied and allowed to dry for about a day, it's time to add some pre-shading. This involves carefully applying black paint along the raised details and panel lines, creating a dramatic contrast that will later enhance the final paint job. The exaggerated shading may look a bit intense at this stage, but it's all part of bringing the model to life with depth and realism. Now, the main color is airbrushed onto the model. I've thinned the paint by about 50% to allow the pre-shading to subtly show through, adding depth to the surface. The interior of the fuselage is divided into different sections, one sprayed with the familiar green shade and the other with metallic colors. With the weathering complete, the individual parts can finally be assembled. Doesn't look too bad, does it? It's just a shame that so much of this detail will barely be visible in the end. Sure, the bomber has a few windows here and there, but there's only so much you can actually see through them. Still, knowing the detail is there makes it all worthwhile. The final part of today's episode is dedicated to the nose section. Here, we'll be using parts that were produced exclusively for this Eduard limited edition. The original kit from HK Models features a somewhat odd nose design, but Eduard addresses this by including several alternative noses tailored to the different variants of the B-17 that can be built from this kit. This section also houses the navigator, so I thought it would be a nice touch to include a map here. No, seriously, I borrowed this idea from another modeler, but it adds such a great sense of realism that I couldn't resist incorporating it myself. And that's all for today. Here's a quick overview of what we've accomplished so far. Of course, I'll also include a few photos in just a moment to showcase the progress. In the next episode, we'll complete the exterior of the fuselage before moving on to the engines and wings. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, have a fantastic day and happy modeling. A big thank you to Brian E. Draves, who supported my channel on Patreon last month. I've been on Patreon for about 6 months now, and while I'm fully aware that my channel isn't one of the most well-known on YouTube, I've come to the conclusion that continuing with Patreon doesn't make much sense for me anymore. It simply requires additional time and effort, resources I don't currently have to spare. The lack of traction on Patreon has shown me that my time might be better spent elsewhere. That's why I've decided to discontinue my Patreon and instead focus on YouTube memberships. After all, YouTube is the platform where I create and share my content. If you'd like to support my work, you'll now find the membership button on YouTube. It costs just $1 per month and helps me keep the channel going. Thank you so much for watching my content. I truly appreciate every single supporter, whether it's through a membership, a subscription, a like, or a comment. You're the reason I keep doing what I do. You're the best. One last thing before I sign off for today. A viewer recently asked if I could create a behind-the-scenes video. I took that question to the community tab to see if there was any interest, and it turns out many of you would love to see something like that. So I'll be working on a behind-the-scenes video in the near future. I'd also like to combine it with a question and answer session. So far, my longtime viewer Norman Smith is the only one who has submitted questions. If you've got a burning question you'd like to ask, head over to the community tab and leave it there. I'd love to hear from you. But for now, take care, and as always, happy modeling.